Welcome everyone to the first ever Strollart Q&A. We have Mike, the director for Strollart and lead artist for Below the Stone here to answer some questions.
Oh yeah. I wanted to do this where we could set up some questions on our Discord and on our various sources and maybe answer some game development questions. Hopefully give some deeper insight onto what I'm about, what Below the Stone's about, Strollart, and yeah.
Alright, so let's get started. What did you and the rest of the crew study?
Well, Andrew, our lead programmer, is and has studied computer science. Karam has a master's degree in composing music for video games. And I actually don't have a formal education. I'm self-taught, and it's something where I sort of have a belief with at least formal education, and I don't mind going into this deeper. I think formal education is something that a lot of people kind of accidentally get driven into sometimes. I remember when I was still in high school, still a youngster in high school, right? And what ended up happening was we had like this guidance counselor. And her recommendation to me, when I was interested in video games and I was telling her that, her first recommendation was, you should go to video game school. And it was something where I realized, like, that just didn't sound right. It was something that I knew there was a different way to go about it. And that's kind of what I did. I decided to go my own way with it. I eventually founded Strollart. And with the help of Andrew as our lead programmer and Karam, we've been putting together Below the Stone.
I guess that does go a bit into the next question. How long have you been involved in game dev?
How long has it been? Like 5 years now? 6 years? I was doing it since I was in high school, so it really might end up being more than 6 years. Now, again, Below the Stone is one of the biggest titles I've ever worked on, the biggest actually. And it's something where I worked on a lot of smaller projects to begin with, little side projects, and built our way up to Below the Stone. And Below the Stone has really been a roller coaster, because I think a lot of people are taking this seriously, including ourselves. And it's something where we knew we were onto something when we presented this publicly, and so many people wanted to see us, make this a reality.
So people want to know, how do you draw such incredible sprites?
Yeah, I think this was a question I saw early on being submitted, and I really appreciate the fact that people love the pixel art so much. It's something I've studied for just self-taught for several years. And it was something that, as time went on, I felt improvement. And I think a lot of people go into pixel art innocently, but naively, where they kind of go in and they think it's going to be easy. It's something that, it's just pixel art, And I'm sure every pixel artist out there is kind of like shaking their head to this, that at least most of the pixel artists I know, that people think pixel art is such an easy thing to do. But in reality, it's not. It's something where there's a whole new skill set you have to learn. I think traditional artists going into pixel art will have an easier time. But if you're just starting out art and you're going into pixel art thinking, oh, this is just going to be easy, it takes a lot of practice. I'm not dissuading anybody from trying it, but it's something that you'll want to consider putting a couple years into mastering your craft, I guess, mastering your art.
What do you believe are essential steps every game dev should follow to make a good, polished, and fun user experience? As
a whole, I would say with user experience, you want to make sure that you are avoiding feature creep. You want to keep it to a core concept, and you want to pay attention to what you're adding. Everything needs to feed into that core concept of what your game is. And if anything does not meet the core concept of your game, it needs to get thrown out. It needs to be considered a side idea. So for Below the Stone, for example, our core concept, we want to basically make sure that we are paying attention to the roguelike element, the idea of this game loop where you are descending, you gather resources, you come back to the surface, and you submit your resources that you want to keep safe, and you can bring along any resources that you want to bring down with you on your next adventure. So in our case, let's say building, right? Building doesn't really make sense underground because there's no permanence underground. And that's something that we had to consider early on. One of the big things that we talked about was building in the game. And it's something that just didn't exactly make sense.
So you guys announced recently that you were signed to Apogee. Some people were wondering, how hard is it to get a publisher, and would you recommend it?
Yeah, in our case, it wasn't exactly that hard to get a publisher. We ended up doing our first Kickstarter, and we ended up getting, I think, at least half a dozen or a dozen publishers messaging us. And really, I think it comes down to putting yourself out there and trying to expose people to your game who previously would not have had exposure. So be brave with exposing your game. As for what I've recommended to people, if you're just starting out, I think a publisher is a great idea.
So some people were concerned that things would change since you had signed with a publisher. So I guess my next question is, has anything changed since you signed with Apogee?
Now, when signing with a publisher, one of the big issues we were thinking about was creative control. However, in our sake for Below the Stone, Apogee actually, in the contract, has given us full creative control of our project. So, of course, they handle the funding side, the marketing side. But when it comes to creative control, we're in the driver's seat. So that was hugely important to us when working on Below the Stone, because we didn't want to change our vision of what the game would be. Mm-hmm. By signing with a publisher, all we did was increase the scope of what the game could be, because now we had the funding and the marketing to do it, to bring it to even more people than it previously would have ever been brought to, including consoles.
So on the topic of, I guess, publicity, what are your thoughts on reaching out to YouTubers and streamers for publicity? Do you think it's better than paying for ads?
I think there's a mix. I think now Apogee handles a lot of the marketing side of things, but I think it is a mix. I think when it comes to paying ads, it's almost like a shotgun effect, right? You're just hitting everything all at once. Right. With streamers and YouTubers, you're a little bit more specific with your audience. You're going for a very specific group of people. So when it comes to YouTubers and influencers and streamers and stuff, right? When you're sending that out to somebody, you might want to target YouTubers who are focused on directly like roguelike games, if your game's a roguelike, or if people like Binding of Isaac content, and this is like a Binding of Isaac YouTuber, you'll send your game to them. It's a little bit more specific that way. But ads, we've experimented with it and are still experimenting with it. But in the end, I think YouTubers and streamers are the best target.
So someone asked, has the Patreon revenue been sufficient enough to keep yourselves going?
Yeah, I want to thank our Patreon supporters while we're while we're doing this question. But it's something where Patreon has been a thing where basically from our previous Kickstarter, it's been one of our only ways of getting funding directly from our audience other than our publisher. So I would like to thank everyone who's been on our Patreon since really the Kickstarter. I think if anybody's looking for funding, try starting a Patreon. Start growing your fan base. You might not make money right away on Patreon, but it's something that it's good to have as an alternative for getting funding for your project.
So you recently announced you're launching a new Kickstarter. How has the game evolved since the first one?
Well, we've only grown the game since our first Kickstarter. Really, the Kickstarter was almost a prototype. It wasn't even a full game. We completely rebuilt the game since the original Kickstarter. And it's something where after our Kickstarter, we learned that was a pretty normal move for video games to do. I'm sure you guys have seen trailers in the past where the trailer is slightly different from the final game, right? Mm-hmm. Like Ubisoft or whatever. And it's something where we realized that was just a regular industry technique after our Kickstarter launched, right? Since then, we've only expanded the game. And We've planned bigger things, going deeper with the game, more customization, a larger dwarven kingdom that wasn't even previously part of the original Kickstarter. It's something where ever since our previous Kickstarter, where it was mostly just ideas on paper and a prototype build of the game, we are now at a almost full-fledged game with a full-fledged vertical slice, able to be played as a demo.
Well, now that the scope of the game, as you said, has increased since the first Kickstarter, what will be the main goal for this one?
The main goal with this Kickstarter is to do what we did with the first Kickstarter and amplify that even further. We want to basically make this Kickstarter something where we reach an even larger audience of people. We set out to hit our goal, just like we did with our first Kickstarter, and have it be something where we expand the scope of this game even further through stretch goals, through additional funding, and it's something where this Kickstarter is a promise to our many fans who have been waiting for it, and that really is our main goal. It's to fulfill the promise we've made to our fans that eventually we will come back to Kickstarter, and here it is, coming back.
So some people were wondering on the rewards for the tiers. Will there be game codes, and if so, on what platforms?
Yes, we are for sure going to have at least Steam codes. There is hints and talks of possibly having Switch codes as part of the Kickstarter. However, I will not make that promise right now.
People were also wondering, will there be any physical rewards?
Yes, there are going to be physical rewards. So anybody who's looking for a Below the Stone mug, you'll get it.
Okay, so looking back on your last Kickstarter, would you have done anything differently?
So, I think amplifying your Kickstarter, one of the big things that we made that we could have done to improve was possibly having our Kickstarter pre-launch page up longer. We had made the mistake of thinking, all right, let's set our pre-launch page 1 week before the Kickstarter. I think that was a mistake because we could have grown our Kickstarter a little bit more by having a few more signups. And I would recommend that to people who are perhaps launching a Kickstarter in the future. I would say have your pre-launch page up for as long as possible, and do not mind the dates as well. Do not pay attention to how long your pre-launch page is going to be up for, because it's something that, unless you're a big person with a lot of people following you, like hundreds, thousands, I think people will forgive you for saying, all right, we're going to delay for a week, or we're going to delay for 2 weeks. People will forgive you if you need additional time.
So how would you describe Below the Stone to someone who's never heard of it?
Yeah, I think Below the Stone, the best way to describe it is it's a punishing pixel art roguelike about dwarves on the quest to the deepest depths, a place where every descent will lead to new adventures, and where only the most determined players with many lost lives will be rewarded by the hidden world lying below the stone.
This has been said, but to reiterate, I guess, when will the game be released, and will it be on all platforms?
We're planning an early access release on Steam of Q2 of 2022, as well as all platforms on 1.0. All major console platforms.
Will there be a physical release of the game?
There is talk and rumor of such a thing. I can't say anything yet, but we are planning some form of physical release for Below the Stone.
How many hours of gameplay do you estimate the core game will be?
Yeah, I think in Below the Stone, well, we're hoping that every layer of the game has roughly 5 to 10 hours of gameplay before you see everything in a single layer, because we are planning rare biomes, rare resources you can find. So it's something where throughout the layers, the 5 layers that we have planned with the game right now, we're hoping that you'll get a significant amount of gameplay through before you decided, I've seen everything.
How much post-launch support is planned? As in updates, fixes, DLC?
Yeah, we're planning on having updates past 1.0, as well as DLC and fixes. This is something where, obviously, I'm sure a lot of people here have experienced AAA games that don't fix anything after release. In our case, we actually care about our game. So, of course, we're going to have post 1.0 fixes. We want to update the game past 1.0, like actual content updates. And we're going to talk about DLC in the future, obviously. We're still in early alpha or mid alpha right now. So, DLC is something that we'll consider in the future.
On the topic of future content, how much sway will the fans have?
Yeah, I mean, even today, we have a suggestion box on our Discord, and we read everyone's suggestions. And I think with the fans, every suggestion we both read, we consider, we talk about as a team. And it's something where I think when there's enough demand for something, we as developers realize that there's a reason why there's that much demand for it. It's because it's something that people need. So with indie games, you can actually talk directly with developers and suggest something. Whereas, AAA games, they don't really care what the fans exactly want. So that's something that I think in the future we are going to have a lot of sway with our fans when it comes to adding new updates and fixes.
Do you plan on having any type of mod support?
Yeah, this is something that, again, me and the development team have talked about a lot. We realize that people want to play around with the game and add new creatures and new biomes and stuff. And it's something we take seriously. We do want to see if mod support is possible for Below the Stone. And I believe in the future that we will have some sort of way of modding the game.
This is the big one. A lot of people want to know, will the game have multiplayer?
This is something where our publisher is aware, we are aware, every person on our Discord, our community is aware that we are seriously being recommended multiplayer. And I think there's a reason for it. I think people look at Below the Stone as something they would want to play with their friends with. And we are planning some sort of multiplayer in the future, potentially. I think this Kickstarter might be our future Kickstarter here is going to have a lot of play in whether that's possible or not.
Yes, on to the more technical side of things. Are layers infinitely generated or are they a set size?
Yeah, we have them as a set size because early on we actually discussed this a lot, if it made sense to have them infinitely generated. In fact, that was the original plan. But as we continued development, we kind of realized there wasn't really a purpose for having every layer be infinitely generated, because every time you leave the caves, they're going to disappear anyway and regenerate as a completely new cave system. So there is no real purpose to having them infinitely generated. What we can do is make them large enough that they feel like they go on forever, and that's what we plan on doing.
Will there be any other hub-like areas other than the kingdom?
This is something we've also talked about as a team. I think in the future, there's a potential that maybe we'll have this as some sort of DLC or as some sort of post 1.0 update, that we could have some other hub areas, maybe not quite following the same rules as the kingdom, but has crafting and NPCs that you can talk to. Again, this is all sort of talk right now. We don't have anything written in stone, if you will, yet, but it's something that we've talked about for sure.
You mentioned this earlier on, but will there be any building or decorating in the game?
Yeah, we've talked about adding building in the game before, potentially as a thing where you can decorate the Dwarven Kingdom that you're at. This is something that might come down to something that would be related to our Kickstarter. However, it doesn't exactly meet the core concept of the game. So right now it's a maybe.
Will there be any fishing or farming?
We're planning on some form of fishing and some form of farming as well. This is something that I feel is closer to the core concept of the game as a resource gathering game. So fishing and farming, I think, sort of fits the puzzle piece for Below the Stone.
How many kinds of mimics will be in the game?
So whoever asked that question, you rock. We are planning on adding several kinds of mimics. I can't say them all here because they wouldn't really be mimics if I told everyone which ones they were. However, yes, we are planning on many kinds of mimics that you will see in Below the Stone.
Will there be a bestiary in the game?
We are planning some form of bestiary. That's obviously very intensive on my side as the artist, but there is something that we're considering, some sort of monster journal, or like you said, a bestiary. And I think it makes sense because it's something where in our game we have so many different creatures and resources and things you can encounter in the caves that it would make sense to have some way to log them and contain all the information of all the creatures you found. So there are plans on adding a bestiary.
What size is the inventory, and will you be able to upgrade it?
Right now we have a backpack that has exactly 18 slots, as well as a hotbar with 10 slots. So you start the game with 28 slots of inventory, and we are planning on having it where you can upgrade your inventory.
Will there be pets other than the ones who won the community contest?
We are planning on adding additional pets past the people who have won the community contest. We can't announce them yet. I don't want to spoil anything, but yes, we are planning on various different pets outside of the community contest.
Were there any other considerations for engines or frameworks besides Unity?
Early on, we considered making our own engine, but then we realized that would be a really bad idea, so then we went with Unity.
Will the soundtrack be available for purchase once the game is fully released?
Yes, we're planning on having the soundtrack, and by Karam, of course. Karam has been a great musician and composer for Below the Stone, so I'm glad that people are already thinking about buying his soundtrack. But yes, we are planning on having the soundtrack be a separate purchase from the game.
What was the biggest challenge in making Below the Stone a fun game?
I think with any game, it's really easy to make a terrible game. Just by throwing a bunch of different ideas together, you can very easily spiral out of control, and you end up having this sort of amalgamation of feature creep. I think with Below the Stone, since we are so adamant on sticking with the core concepts of the game, we're able to keep it fun and keep the vision clear and clean.
What would you say has been the most interesting thing you've learned while working on this project?
With Below the Stone, I've learned so much, and it's hard to compile it into one interesting thing. But I think it's something where, again, I've just learned so many things about game development by putting myself out there. And I think that's really the one thing I would put it down as. I myself personally, have just learned so much by putting my project out there and just letting people, like, exposing it to people. And I think that's just generally the best take I can give for that. Put yourself out there and just let the world see what you created.
What are your plans after Below the Stone?
I think other than the Bahamas, I think I think what I'm going to do is we're going to start on our next game. Of course, we want to continue development on Below the Stone, but it's something where after Below the Stone, after we're finished, after we're complete Below the Stone, I think we would want to go on to the next game.
Are there any plans for merch?
Yes. We're planning on merchandise for our Kickstarter as well as outside Kickstarter, whether it's Below the Stone mugs, Below the Stone stickers. We even have a Below the Stone book planned, a developer diary, an art book for Below the Stone. So if you're looking for merch, Below the Stone is going to have it.
Will there be any future community events like the Game Jam and Pet Design Contest?
Of course, I think our community is one of the most important things when it comes to Below the Stone and Strollart and me in general. And I think we would want to host future game jams and pet design contests and keep our community involved with what we do. And like I said earlier, we read all of your suggestions, we read all of your comments in our Discord, so it's always nice to have a lively community the way we do. So of course we're planning on future community events.
And the final question, will there be any future Q&As?
Oh yeah, I think we will definitely want to have future Q&As because questions don't end with just one Q&A.
Very true. If anything, more arise.
Yep, exactly. Of course, I want to thank all of our Patreons who have supported us so far, everybody in our community who has been a part of both Strollart and Below the Stone. I read all of your comments. It's something that I hold all of you very dearly in my heart, and I want to thank you all.